A few weeks ago I have shown you how to create a reverse bassline sound in FL Studio. In this tutorial we haven't been using synthesizers, and I got a few requests to create a similar video for Ableton users, so here we go. Today we will also be using a kick drum to create a reverse bassline sound, so the approach in resampling is going to be different. If you see me for the first time, my name is Marcin. I make in-depth hard and industrial techno tutorials for sound design for both Ableton Live and FL Studio. I also sell on my website some sample and preset packs. For example, the synthesizer you have just heard in the beat right now comes from my freshly released Rave Techno Reinforcement Volume 2 sample and preset pack for Ableton Wavetable and Xfire Serum. Also, the project from today's video can be downloaded straight from my Patreon page. Since again we will be using kick drum samples to create not only the kick itself but also the bass line, let's get the drum rack channel onto which I will load around 4 different kick samples. And if you would like to ask me, Marcin, are you going to use Vengeance kick drum samples again? I'm going to say yes. For this kind of kick drum, for a reverse bassline sound, we will need long kick sample that has fat low end, so we don't have to create another sub bass sound, for example. And Vengeance kick drum samples are the best for that. And these are the 5 kick drums I've just picked. Notice that all of them are quite long, meaning that the length of the sample is over 300 milliseconds, and this gives us a tail that is long enough for further resampling. All of these kick drums, if they are going to have some reverb in the end or some noise, like in just this sample, such sounds are going to be very useful in kick drum layering when we will want to create a more interesting reverse bassline sound. Of course, if all of these samples were short, like this one, these two are of course a bad choice for a kick sample. We are not going to get an interesting reverse bassline from resampling the tail of the kick drum. And out of these 5 kick samples, I'm going to pick this one as my main fundamental kick sample, so this will be the most important kick drum for the whole kick creation. So let's create a 4-4 pattern. I want to pay attention to the volume level. The volume of the kick drum here is equal to -6 dB. Maybe I could turn it down just a bit down to get more headroom from between the volume of the kick drum to my absolute 0 decibel level. This is something I've been talking about in the last video where you could see Lucas making his first mixdown mistakes. And now when the volume levels are safe, I can keep on adjusting the kick drum sample. Out of quite a few different parameters I could adjust in the simpler, the most interesting and important one will be the pitch of the kick sample. Other parameters, like for example the fade in, that can be used to make your kick drum hit less hard, will be used for kick drum layering, because soon on top of this main kick drum I'm going to play another sample. So in the simpler for the main kick, I'm going to turn off the snap switch, so we are not going to trim the kick drum at all to make it shorter, and I'm going to bring the pitch by 2 semitones. Pitching down the kick drum by 2 semitones is something I wanted to do. And now I'm ready for adding another kick drum sample that will play on top of the main kick drum. At first, let's just play each of the kick drum samples on top, and let's decide what kick drum is going to fit most to our main kick sound. Alright, the sample was very interesting, but in the end I'm going to use the sample number 26. And before we make any adjustments to this kick sample, I'm talking about the change of the pitch or the kick drum lengths, we will have to do something very important, and that is using a high pass filter on each kick drum layer to avoid problems with low end overlap. Because currently from both main kick sample and kick drum layer we can expect the low frequencies to play, and if we play at the same time 2 sounds with low frequencies, these low frequencies are going to clash, and in regards to the kick drum sample, it means that the low end punch is basically gone. Let's hear that quickly. What does it sound like? I will put an equalizer on the master channel, and if we listen to the low end, we will discover that when 2 kick drum samples are played, the punch in the low end is weaker than the punch coming from just either of these kick samples, play-in and solo. This might not have been the worst example of the low end overlap, but still, if I played the main kick drum sample in solo, we can hear how good the low end sounds like. The punch is there, and I don't want to ruin it by adding low end coming from the other kick drum sample. Let's turn off the low pass filter, and on the kick drum layer we will use now a high pass filter. Along with using a high pass filter, I will turn down the volume of this kick drum layer as well. Now with the volume levels roughly adjusted, it will be much easier to hear how important is it to use a high pass filter on the kick drum layer. Let's listen to both kick drums playing at the same time, and I'm going to turn on and off the EQ8. And now regarding the simpler adjustments, in case of this kick drum, I'm not going to change the pitch of the kick drum layer, so of course you can do it when you will be making your own kick sounds. Instead of changing the pitch, I'm going to make this kick drum layer a bit short. The purpose of doing that would be to, for example, to not make this kick drum layer cover the low end from the main kick drum sample. You can get the difference. If I let the layer kick drum play with its full length, the kick drum is going to be more full in the mid and high frequencies, but if I trim the kick drum, yes, it's going to sound more deep, because in the end it's only the low end coming from the main kick drum sample that is playing. This is what shortening the kick drum sample do to the whole kick drum. I can also trim the kick drum from the left, and now what we are going to do is we are going to change the way that these two samples interact. We can treat it a bit as the phase alignment because we changed the starting point of each sample. Yes, and the relative position of these two samples is going to change mainly the transient of the whole resulting kick drum. This technique is something I've been using in my kick drum layering tutorial that is also for Ableton, so let's try doing that once again. This is something that is not going to well change the sound by 180 degrees, but it's worth it to shape the transient a bit. After trimming the kick drum from both left and right, it might happen that if we play the kick drum layer in solo, we will notice some annoying clicks in both beginning and the end of the sample. Now I can use both fade in and fade out knobs. If I create a fade in and fade out, we can see that the volume of the kick drum is not going to turn down immediately. Because of that, the kick drum will not have any clicks anymore. Two kick drum samples are layered. The kick drum we have right now is going to be exported and used to create a reverse bassline sound. But before that, if you like the way I explain things and you would like to learn more about other sound design or music production related subjects, Go check out my trulymusic.com website to learn more about my private music production lessons. Free consultations are available as well, so use the online calendar to schedule your consultation call. So I let two kick drums play at the same time. Let's make this kick drum play only once. This channel is something I want to duplicate. Now I can freeze it and flatten to get an exported kick drum sample. Of course, we could solo the kick drum channel as well and use the export audio/video feature in Ableton. Both solutions are going to be equally fine. Now this sample is something that is going to end up in my drum rack channel. Here is the exported sample. To make the project a bit more organized, I can get rid of the remaining samples I will not want to use. And now, using auto channels, let me show you how we are going to create a reverse bassline. So these are the three kick drum samples that we have used so far. The first two samples, of course, they are used to create the punch for the whole kick drum. This sample was used for layering, so let's shorten it a bit. And on top of everything, we have also shown the kick drum that we are going to use well as a reverse bassline sound. So in just a second, the sound obviously is going to be reversed. If I have the kick drum as an audio track, I can click just the R button to reverse the whole sample. And now the deal will be to trim the kick drum sample. We need to play the right part of this kick drum sample to create the groove and rhythm we want. And after all of these adjustments, this for example can sound like that. This is how our reverse bassline could look like if we used audio channels. Now I'm going to make the same adjustments in the drum rack channel. Obviously, the kick drum we use for the reverse bassline sound has to be added to the whole MIDI clip. Now we can hear that the kick drum sounds as if it had a phaser effect. This is of course a result of the phase issues. We didn't reverse the bassline kick drum yet, so let's do this right now. And now to adjust the rhythm, we can manipulate the length of each note in the MIDI clip. And preferably we can start by playing the bass line for the kick drum right in the middle of each beat. This would be our starting point. The second half of the kick drum sounds a bit dull and not alive because we start playing the reversed kick drum right from the beginning, where there isn't that much of mid frequencies. Let's start trimming the kick drum sample to find the right part of the kick I want to play. Now you could hear that if I trim the kick drum too much, the sample will be so short that there will be some silence in the kick drum, which of course makes the kick drum sound less full. And on top of that, again, I can use the fade in and fade out knobs to get rid of any clicks if they appear after shortening the kick drum sample. Also, changing the pitch of the reversed kick drum is something that I recommend to play around with. After all, the tail of the kick drum doesn't have to be exactly at the same pitch that's the, let's say, first half or the punch part of the kick drum. Depending on the pitch settings of the reversed kick drum, depending on the length of the reversed kick drum, and depending on the rhythm I create with the MIDI clip, I can create many different kick drums in that style. And definitely take your time when creating a reverse bassline sound like that, because these simple adjustments we have been doing right now influence the rhythm heavily. Now let me show you how this kick drum sounds like in the end. By trimming the sample properly, it seems like I glued the bassline part of the kick drum well with the remaining kick sounds. Now let's stay for a little longer with the reverse bassline creation. We have created the rhythm for the kick drum, but the bassline itself isn't that either full or sharp as it could be. Definitely some distortion could be used to make things more spicy. Let me adjust the volume of the reversed kick drum a bit. And now I'm ready to use some distortion on this kick drum. If you ask me why there isn't a high pass filter in this kick drum bassline anymore, I will explain and say that our two kick drum samples end exactly at this moment, so this is the moment where the low end stops playing from these kick samples, and from the second half of each beat, the low end comes only from the kick drum bassline sound. That's why I don't need to separate these two sounds by using an equalizer, because these sounds are already separated, because they are played at different times. When it comes to the saturation or just distortion, one of more aggressive effects in Ableton, and one that is pretty commonly used, is the saturator itself. At first, let's add some distortion to this reverse bassline kick drum, so we can hear the difference in these various distortion styles available. This is something that we will choose to decide if the kick drum has to be very noisy or just a little noisy. Without any doubt, the hard curve distortion style sounds best. It gives most of that fuzz that I can control with the drive amount. The more drive I use, the more fuzzy the sound becomes. One extra thing you could hear is that when I add more drive to the sound, the volume of the output also changes and increases. I always should, in theory, compensate the output volume of the kick drum with the output level. So, for example, when we turn on and off the saturator, it's easy to judge how much saturation, how much the sound of the kick drum changes. It's much easier to work more accurately with the plugins that way. Is adjusting the drive knob and choosing the distortion style the only way to control the sound coming from the saturator? Not necessarily. I also have on the bottom the color section that works just like a simple equalizer that is preceding the saturator itself. And this color section is split into two sections. The first one consists of only the bass knob that makes the saturator more sensitive to low frequencies. So if we turn up the bass knob, the saturator is going to focus more on the low and it's going to be more sensitive. As you can imagine, it results in even more distortion added. This, though, gives a similar result to just using the drive knob. So let's focus on the second section that consists of these three remaining knobs. These three remaining knobs work just like a single peak filter in the equalizer if we put an equalizer before the saturator. So the frequency knob works just like the frequency knob in the equalizer. The width knob in the saturator works just like the Q knob in the EQ8. The depth knob is just like the gain knob in the equalizer. So by boosting or cutting at different frequency ranges, we can further shape the kick drum sound. It will be very noticeable if I, for example, boost some of the low or low mid frequencies in this reversed kick drum sound. Of course, in the end, if we turn on and off the saturator and discover that there's too much saturation used on the kick drum, that the kick drum sound changes by too much, I can always use the dry wet knob to blend the effect. The saturation alone gives us already a lot of possibilities to shape the bassline of the kick drum. Of course, something more advanced would be to try to use two distortion effects at the same time, which is something that I will do in a second. But at first, let me show you how the bassline is going to sound after using the saturator, once I adjust all of its settings more accurately. This is how distorted I want my bassline to be. Some would say that this bassline is already decent, and some would say that this bassline is, for example, too noisy or it has too much high frequencies. I also think that this bassline is too fuzzy, but I like the way the saturator works with the mid frequencies. The whole kick drum is getting crispy. The only problem is just the amount of too much high end. So I would like to get rid of that extra high end by using a low-pass filter. This low-pass filter can be used either before or after the saturator effect. So let me show you how the kick drum would change if we try using the equalizer in these both places. In this particular kick drum, it didn't matter much whether the EQ8 was before or after the saturator. Maybe this difference would be more noticeable if we were using a few distortion effects or if there was much more distortion added to the kick drum. But fortunately, we could hear easily that with a low-pass filter added, I've just readjusted this filter now to get even more high end, the kick drum is not that fuzzy anymore. And this is how I made the bassline more fried. But now I would like this bassline to be a bit fatter. The saturator effect was used to bring mostly mid or high frequencies to the kick drum, but if I want to just warm up the kick a bit, a great choice is the classic drum bass effect. At first, to make it easy, I'm going to place the drum bass in the very end of the bassline processing chain, but of course, as we will discover later, depending on where the drum bass is added, the sound of the kick drum also changes. Alright. The first thing I want to do is, again, I would like to drive the sound hard enough so I can hear the difference between these three distortion styles available. Choosing the distortion style and fine-tuning the amount of drive afterwards is the first thing I want to do. Of course, now we can hear that the volume of the bassline is much higher than without the drum bass effect, so let me already use the output knob to make the volume equal. We could definitely hear the difference between the medium and hard distortion styles, but if I set the distortion style to either soft or medium, it doesn't seem like the sound changes by much. So now let's play the kick drum with and without the drum bass. So now we hear that it makes sense to use the drum bass because it makes the bassline more fat. In addition to the drive knob that mainly makes the bass warmer, if I want to add more crunch or again some mid and high frequencies to it, I can use the crunch knob as well. On the other hand, the damp knob can be used to get rid of some of the high end if we use, for example, a bit too much of the crunch or if we want just our bassline to be more dark. The last two controls that we are interested in is both transients and the tri-wet. The transients knob is used more often when working on a normal kick drum sample, that is the sample with some transient in the beginning. Our bassline sound doesn't have a transient in the beginning because it's basically a reversed sample. So the transients knob here is going to just shape the bassline itself. It's just going to change a bit the tone or timbre of the bassline sound. The second control I was interested in is the tri-wet. Of course, I can use it to blend the drum bass with the whole bassline if it turns out that, for example, the bassline is too warm or too fat. Yes, this situation is possible as well. Techno tracks do not only have to sound fat, but also clean. this is how drum bass could be used to warm up the kick drum. You could ask me a question now. If bassline gets warmer after using the drum bass, wouldn't it make sense to use the drum bass on just the whole kick drum? Well, the answer is that I wanted this kick drum to have a bit more clean attack. I want the punch part of the kick drum, the beginning of the kick drum, to have a bit more mid and high frequencies. I don't need lots of low end punch in that part of the kick drum. That's why I decided to make only the bassline, the reverse bassline itself, warmer. But of course I can show you now how the drum bass is going to change the sound of the kick drum if we place it in different places. This is for example how the kick would sound like if the drum bass is used in the very end, so it processes all 3 samples together. Let's bring the drum bass back to the bassline chain only, but we will try to play this drum bass before saturator or maybe before the equalizer. And again, we can expect different kick drums to be created. In the end, this is how I want my drum bass to sound like. I will keep it placed after the saturator. The settings are already adjusted. Okay, we could hear that using the drum bass in the very end of the kick drum channel, so using the drum bass on all 3 samples together, that it sound good. I didn't like the way the kick drum sounded in the end, but some group processing or group saturation should be used to, for example, glue everything together. After all, this is something that I have been doing in nearly every kick drum tutorial. Always some group processing is necessary. We are using either some saturation in the group or multiband compression, or we can use both effects as well. So let me use a different distortion effect on the group processing now. Let's use the overdrive. And the overdrive effect will be used now in the end of the whole kick drum channel. I'm going to use it to give the whole kick drum just a bit more rumble, to make the kick a bit fuller and deeper. This overdrive effect is so cool because it doesn't affect much either the transient or the dynamics of the whole kick drum. Probably right now when I play the kick drum with the overdrive, we will discover that there is too much distortion. Usually the dry wet stays much below 50%. So let me turn down this a bit. And regarding the remaining adjustments, I would like to begin with using a bandpass filter. With both frequency and Q control, I tell what frequency range I want to boost or maybe excite a bit. I was talking about using the overdrive as a way to make the kick drum more rumbly, more full, so I would be interested in exciting the frequency range somewhere from around 80 to maybe 200 Hz. So the middle position, the starting point, could be, for example, 150 Hz. Let's see how exciting different frequency ranges is going to change the kick drum. We can hear that with lots of overdrive distortion. We could make our kick drum to remind a bit, maybe some Bochka or industrial techno kick drum, but I don't need that much of distortion here. So let's turn down the drive knob and adjust the tone knob as well. The tone adds some extra high end after the distortion stage, and the drive is self-explanatory. It just tells the amount of added distortion to the whole sound. For example, I would like to make this kick fatter without adding much of the high end, so I turned the tone knob very low and I used the drive knob in a higher amount. In the end, I want to adjust the dynamics control as well. This is going to remind just a bit the transients knob I have had in the drum bass effect. There's no clear description I can give you to how does the dynamic fader work, so let's try at first the extreme settings and then adjust the dynamics to the value that seems to sound best. After the dynamics fader is set, I want to blend this effect. Probably using the tri-wet at 18 is still a bit too much for this kick drum. Because I feel like the kick drum is a bit too muddy or bloated now, so let's try maybe 6% of tri-wet. This is the overdrive effect after more accurate adjustments. Again, the tri-wet stays at very low value. Let's play the kick drum again. And the kick drum is now ready for some multiband compression. A multiband compression is an effect that shapes the dynamics of the low, mid and high frequencies separately. For example, with a multiband compression, it would be possible to make the kick drum a bit more tight by compressing the mid frequencies without sacrificing the punch and the fullness of the low end. That would be, for example, not compressed at all. We can also shape the high end of the kick drum in various ways. I could, for example, make the kick drum more clicky or less clicky by compressing the high frequencies alone. If you have ever been using, for example, the Xfer OTT plugin, OTT compression is also a form of multiband compression, so you might have already experienced how does multiband compression can change the sound. While OTT compression is very aggressive, here I would like to use the Ableton's multiband compressor to glue the mid frequencies of the kick drum to make the whole kick drum sound full, and this is going to also make the whole sound more rhythmic. Now, a very important disclaimer: multiband compression is a quite complex and difficult subject. Explaining how I would like to set up the whole multiband compressor from the beginning would take me nearly a whole hour, but fortunately for you, I already made a tutorial on how I use Ableton's multiband compressor. This video is pretty long, as you can see, but if you watch it you will see two different examples of how I compress industrial or hard techno kick drums to make them sound better. And now I'm going to apply the multiband compressor on this kick drum as well. In case of this kick drum, I'm not going to use lots of multiband compression. For example, you can see that on the high end the ratio is set to not even 2 to 1. In remaining frequency ranges, the threshold is set fairly low or high. I mean that the threshold is a bit closer to 0 decibels than usually. So even turning on and off the individual compressors is not going to give that much of a change in the sound. Let's compare the sound of the whole kick drum with and without the whole multiband dynamics effect, and then you will discover that the whole kick drum gets a bit more round, it gets a bit more glued. This is the result I get from carefully sculpting the dynamics of the highs, mids and lows separately. The last element of the group processing of this kick drum would be the equalizer. We have used so far some distortion already. We have used saturation, overdrive and drum bass effects, so it might turn out that in the end the kick drum we have currently has a bit too much of the mid frequencies. This can cause the kick drum to sound a bit too hollow. And also the low end of this kick drum can be covered by these mid frequencies. If we get rid of some of these mid frequencies, we will discover that the kick drum sounds much more heavier and deeper. At first I would like to equalize the whole kick drum, because equalizing the whole kick drum sample is going to impact the sound most. When it comes to making a cut in the mid frequencies to make the kick drum less hollow, I'm talking about cut in the frequency range from around 300 Hz, maybe even up to 1K. Starting out with a single filter that makes a cut somewhere here is of course a good beginning. But of course some annoying mid-frequencies that we don't need are not going to be only in the 500 Hz range. So it might take some time to use maybe two or three more filters like that to target precisely some other resonances. And after getting rid of the mid-frequencies that I don't need, that make the kick drum sound hollow, I might try to make my kick drum a bit harder in the low end. So now we will want to boost with a separate filter the low end. I can make a choice. If I want to make the kick drum simply to sound more deep, I want to boost the frequencies from around 60 Hz, I mean where the lowest frequencies of the kick drum sit. This is what would make the kick drum more heavy, but another feeling of rumble or heaviness can be added if I boost a slightly higher frequency range. So please remember, the low end of the kick drum does not only consist of around 60 Hz range, also frequencies from around 100 Hz range can be very important. This is also the frequency range where the punch of the kick drum sample is coming from. In the end, I adjusted the equalizer just like that. After getting rid of the mid frequencies to make the kick drum cleaner, I'm boosting slightly the 80 Hz range to add to the kick drum just a bit more of the rumble. Let's play the whole kick and turn on and off the EQ8. Equalization of the whole kick drum is finished. Now I can equalize as well individual kick drum elements, that is, 3 samples separately. Fortunately, the equalization of these 3 individual samples might be a bit easier. For example, in the kick drum layer, where we previously used only a high pass filter, I'm adding another peak filter that boosts some of the mid frequencies. You could ask me, why in the kick group equalization I got rid of the mid frequencies to boost them now in the kick drum layer sound? Well, the mid frequencies coming from the whole kick drum can sound a bit different than the mid frequencies coming from the single kick drum element. In case of the kick drum layer, it could turn out that, for example, I did like the mid frequencies coming from the kick drum layer, that's why I decided to slightly boost them to make the whole kick more full. But I wouldn't like to do the same to the whole kick drum. Let's listen to how does the sound of the kick change when I add this single filter, and this will be the everything I want to do in the kick drum layer equalization. Of course, because now we are working with individual kick drum samples, the equalization on individual kick samples is going to be less impactful than the equalization of the whole kick drum. The reversed kick drum that is used for bassline is going to also get its own rumble boost. Now I'm boosting the similar frequency range I've been boosting in the kick drum group equalization. But what is the difference? If I boosted here these frequencies more, It would mean that the whole kick drum from the beginning could be a bit too muddy. I wanted to make only the bassline part of the kick drum a bit more full and rumbly, so that's why I used here a separate equalizer. I want to use this equalizer in the very end, after all the distortion plugins I have here. And again, the kick drum, especially in the bassline part, gets a bit fuller. The main kick drum sample will get its own equalizer as well. The first thing we could notice is that I make the beginning of the kick drum more deep by boosting the lowest frequencies of this kick drum sample. Another interesting thing is a low pass filter. With this one I make the transient of the kick drum, so the beginning of the kick drum, more dark. I'm getting rid a bit of that click coming from the kick sample. And the whole kick drum is now finished. Now creating the techno beat is as simple as just showing some percussion and synthesizers on top of the kick drum, and we have another rhythmic banger. Thanks for watching and see you until next time.